So I just wanted to give a little preface and introduction on today's video. This is a voice recording that I just started keeping, I started taking notes just for myself, but then as usual, it turned into something that I thought was worth just posting so that you could get the full stream of thought. So it starts off rough and then it gets more refined towards the end. But it starts off as just my thoughts, my stream of thoughts on the connection between the significance of water wells when they're brought up in the Old Testament. And then I noticed in my reading of the passage when Abraham's son Isaac, they find a wife for him, they send a servant to go to find a wife out of Abraham's people. And they specifically don't want a Canaanite woman. And so the servant goes to the well. And then I made a connection between that and Jesus, the scene. Literally, this is my thought process that I'm giving to you. So it sets up what you're about to listen to. The scene in The Chosen, I believe it's like the last episode of season 1 and the first episode of season 2. Where Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well. And I made that connection thinking, oh my gosh, so many times, the things that are happening in the Old Testament are foreshadowing the coming of the Christ and the way that the Christ came back, and specifically is living out almost like performance art, spiritual performance art, the history of old in the roots of the patriarch of Judaism. So it's so interesting. So I'm drawing these parallels not as a theologian, but just someone who's reading this with deep enthusiasm, with an interest in cosmology, and I study Kabbalah, and I read out of the Gnostic Gospels, and I am also an intuitive channel. Judeo-Christian mystic, Jewish, leaning towards the Jewish roots of Christianity, feeling like they go hand in hand, but Jesus completes the whole thing, right? So I have to see them as a whole. And so I've been studying when I can and where I can, Hebrew origins of things and that context, and keeping those holidays and rituals. So that context being said about where my understanding is coming from, I often have divine inspiration and insight about things when I open myself up to it and start reading. And then when I go back and cross-reference what my hunches were, I often find that this is supported in other, I guess, literary commentary as well in other places. So generally that's kind of how it goes. So this is my today's observation of what I was reading, because basically I went back to reread what I had already been reading about Abraham in Genesis, and I was like, you know what, all of that, there's so much, so I'm going to go back and reread it today. And so that's what I noticed today was, the connection between, I was like, I wonder if there's some significance here about the wells that they keep bringing up and where they are and their claim that they're staking to them, and the fact that Isaac's servant going to the well to find his wife was very similar and paralleled the story of Jesus having almost the exact introductory line in his conversation with the Samaritan woman. It was almost like Jesus was making a reference to what was about to happen from that passage. And so now we dissect this symbolically and in this observation, and in my just stream of consciousness thoughts about it. And then later I go and read from the passage, and we unpack the passage together from John 4:4. All right, hopefully you'll get something. You'll get my stream of thought and what I'm trying to illustrate in my observations. Bless ya. And here's the episode. I had to stop and record this because I was having a lot of connections with things that I had been reading in the Old Testament, and then things that stood out to me that Jesus has done in the New Testament, or at least scenes that have called to mind from like The Chosen. So I noticed that the well is a very significant thing. I'm like reading, the Old Testament, and I'm like, okay, there are very distinct moments where God speaks directly to the prophets. There are sort of the highlights of the stories of the prophets. There's very little narrative about interactions and things that go on. But then there's like a lot of attention called to people's ages, how long they live, when they have children. So those numbers are always significant, although I don't know the depths of that. But like also where they go, and like there's always this like poignant moment that calls attention to whatever the well is, the water wells. So Abraham went out into his lands and his promised lands, and whenever he would settle somewhere, he would dig a well and he would build an altar there, which is like mastering. When you master a realm, you build an altar there in dedication to the source of that insight and knowledge and self-mastery and nourishment and God's provision over that realm within you, right? Abraham was taking possession and staking claim over these lands, right? And symbolically, these are the realms that we try to master in the pursuit of self-control in our human psyche, right? In our human struggle, which is represented by pentacles, cups, wands, and swords. Mental, emotional, physical, like material world, and spiritual issues. So laying that groundwork for the significance of the wells, the spring of the life water, the waters of creation, the waters of God's covenant and the promise and the ever-flowing, everlasting love and life and wellness and prosperity that he gives to his prophet. So after Abraham became old, there's an accounting of wanting to find a bride for Isaac. Isaac is the only begotten son of Abraham. When Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, and he was going up the hill towards the altar, he had Isaac carry the wood on which Isaac would be sacrificed. This is a foreshadowing of Christ making his way up what would be the 12 stations of the cross, carrying his own cross up the hill on which he would be crucified. So this is the establishment of God's covenant once again with Abraham, but through Abraham to the future generations of all of Abraham, to all of God's children, through the sacrifice of the Christ, God's only begotten son. So when God said to Abraham, "You will sacrifice your only begotten son Isaac to me," he obeyed without hesitation and acted quickly the next morning, right? He received this revelation at night, and by the next morning, he was prepared to do the action in that new day. And so Abraham took Isaac, who was an adult at this point, who knew what he was doing, who represents the left column energy, Isaac representing the right column energy. Abraham took Isaac up to the altar. He bound him. He lay him on the wood that he carried as Christ carried his own cross. So too, Christ willingly went and let himself be bound and placed on this cross at the altar. And in the last minute, as Abraham had raised his hands, grasping the dagger, he was going to strike down and slay Isaac. just before the angel of the Lord said, Abraham, Abraham, and he said, oh, here I am. I am. And the angel of the Lord said, you don't have to do that. Here is a sacrifice. There's a ram. And so there was a ram that was provided. A lamb was provided to take the place of the Son of Man, to be a lamb for the slaughter on behalf of the Son. So, because Abraham was willing to give his only begotten son to God, God made another covenant with Abraham that day of his blessing and prosperity, and all the nations would come from him, and so forth, right? So when Jesus came, he came as a lamb prepared for the slaughter to take on the judgment of us, the Son of Man, as the Son of Man, as the Son of God, and do it willingly and carry his own cross. And so that was like the precedent, that because Abraham took that action and was willing to do the self-sacrifice, then it's like he put the deposit away. He prepared the way for to allow the to plant the seed for the fruition of the fruition of the prophecy. So too did Adam in the fast, the 8-day fast, on behalf of all mankind, plant the seed for the miracle of Hanukkah to open the gates every year at that time of year for those 8 days for the Feast of Lights. So we see that like these first seed level covenants and actions that were taken ultimately foretell, and plant the seeds of the coming of our salvation, of the coming of the Christ. Fast forward to Isaac's sons, adulthood has progressed, and Isaac is old, and Sarah, his wife, the mother of Isaac, has passed away. It's time for Isaac to have a wife. And so Abraham is like, I do not want Isaac to be married to a Canaanite woman. I want him to carry on our bloodline and be married to someone from our clan. So go back. He sent a servant. Go back and find a woman who's from our clan that would befit him, who, keeps the laws and whatnot. And he has these stipulations, and she's got to be perfect, and, all this stuff. And so you got to go to the well and see if she's willing to come back on her own terms. And if she is, then bring her back. And so Isaac's servant, or a servant on behalf of Isaac, goes to find the most beautiful woman in state of perfection, who's like readily willing to be of service, to give the servant water at the well. So the servant's like, okay, all the women come out to the well, so that's my plan. I'm going to go to the well where the women gather, and I'm going to find the most pristine woman, and whoever will give me water, that's who I know will be the bride. And so he took a golden nose ring and 2 gold bracelets for this woman as an offering, as an engagement offering. So he goes to the watering well, knowing that the women are going to bring the vessels to collect the water. What do women represent? The feminine, the divine feminine self, the vessel. We are all the vessel in relation to the light. So the feminine represents the soul that can contain the life force of the Creator, the light of the Creator, in the image of the Creator. So the women are the ones that come to the water source. They receive the water source directly and then bring it back to the household, to the masculine, to the awareness, to the consciousness. The unconscious brings forth the waters of nourishment and life to the consciousness. So the servant goes to the water well to find the wife. And it just so happens that when he asked the most beautiful woman there if she would get him water, she said, "Oh, yes, please let me give you water." Not only, he said, "Will you lower your cup and give me something to drink? Or give me a drink?" She said, "Yes, and I will water your camels too." And so he's like, "Wow, this is great news. You're you're already showing good signs." And so come to find out, she is not only this great woman that gives the criteria that has been asked for, but she's also the granddaughter of Abraham's actual brother. So she's like direct royalty from the bloodline, pure vessel, virgin, beautiful, like high priestess, can't ask for more, willing, immediately obedient. Awesome. So they go back. She is willing. The family's excited. They're like, "Can we keep her for like 10 more days?" And he's like, "No, she has to come with me now." 10 more days is significant. 10 days is like the high holy holidays, the process of the soul being awakened at a different level each day. And it's like, "No, we have to take her now. You don't get her any longer." Okay, because she's perfect. So she doesn't need to stay to do any soul correction over that 10 days. She's perfect. She's going now. She has no process. She's perfect. So this is the Old Testament, right? So she is taken. Her name is Rachel. She is given to Isaac as his bride. Fast forward to the New Testament. When Christ finally decides, "Okay, I've gathered most of my disciples. Let's go out on our first mission," where we're kind of going out to the public. They go to Samaria. Samaria is not their land of their origin. It's the land of their enemy, the land of the other. And when they get there, the disciples are all excited to go into the city for nourishment. They want to go get food. And so they're like, "Jesus, do you want to go into the city to get food with us?" And he said, "I don't need the food of the city. I have food from my Father. Father gives me food." And so they're like, "Okay, cool. We'll grab you something. We'll bring you a burger." And so they go into the city, and Jesus says, "I'm going to stay by this well. So just come back when you're finished and meet me at this well." He's at the well. He's at the source of the water, right? He knows that's all he needs. He takes shelter under the shade next to the well. Who does he meet there but Fatima? Fatima was a woman who is a Samaritan woman, so automatically she's considered an unclean enemy of a Jewish man, especially a Jewish rabbi. And she is further soiled because she has been married not once but 5 times, and now she is like entertaining a lover who she wants to get a divorce from her current husband to go be with him. So she's ruined amongst all the women in the city. Everybody despises her. She's considered a whore, and she has to go to the well by herself every day at the hardest part of the day in the heat of the sun, sweating and a wreck all the time, flushed, gross, and it's the hardest life for her because she is completely cast away from her people. She's rejected, she's ostracized, and everything is harder on her. She's getting the full heat of the sun, right? So she has to live this life. So Jesus is sitting there waiting for this woman when she arrives, and she's exhausted and tired and cranky from her journey, and hot and sweaty, and she starts to lower her vessel, her clay pot, down into the well. And Jesus says, "Would you mind getting me a drink?" He said the exact same words that are said in the Old Testament to the woman at the well that Abraham's servant asked. And I don't know if it's a known connection here, but I'm making the connection that Jesus is going back and reliving and referencing this exact moment for a reason. He went to this well. It may have been the same well. I think it was dug by Jacob, so I don't know if it was the same as Abraham. But yet again, it was a well dug by a patriarch that claimed the land in the name of God and dug a well there and set up an altar as a devotion to God. So another, a prophet claims the source of nourishment and wisdom and understanding over a realm in the glory of God. So another perfection of another level of the soul here we're seeing. And again, at the well at the point of a well that was dug by a patriarch. So they are at this well in modern day Samaria at this point. In ancient times, this well was dug by a patriarch, Joseph or Jacob. I can't remember which one. So it's interesting because Fatima is like, you want to drink from me? A Jewish man, you want to drink from me, a Samaritan woman? Wouldn't that soil you to even make contact with something? Aren't I a soiled vessel? Wouldn't that, make you unclean? And he said, if you knew who I was, you'd be asking me for a drink. And he goes on to kind of probe her, and she's getting more combative. And she's not ready to serve him. And she is a ruinous woman. She's the very opposite of the readily available servant woman who's like, yes, I am all in. I am precious. I am perfect. I have been kept pristine. I am a virgin. I am the highest royal. I am of your own bloodline. I am of your own people. That's the Old Testament. The New Testament, the Christ came to her. He goes, do you understand that I came here specifically to meet you? And she was like, me? If you knew about me, you wouldn't say that. And he says to her, and he goes on to tell her her whole history of all of her husbands and how she felt. And he gives her the testimony of her life. And because of that, she knows, oh my God, like this is for real. And he tells her that she's forgiven, and that she tells him he must be the Christ. She recognized him first as the Messiah, as the Christ. She sees him just in his ability to see her. Going back to Hagar, the servant of fucking Abraham and Sarah, who says, you are the God who sees me. So when God recognizes the soiled and broken soul, the one that is ruinous, that is discarded, that is rejected, the soul that is all of us. We are not the pristine perfection of our spirit, but we are the failed and abandoned and scorned, and soiled and said to be ruinous soul, right? But the Christ goes straight to the soul, to appeal to the soul, because it knows the soul will recognize the Christ. The soul will be the first to recognize the Christ. And when I reveal myself to the soul, that healing will heal everything else. That soul will go forward and proclaim my goodness and my redemption to the rest of the soul and the rest of the consciousness. And then it will go forward and be known in your actions and in the fruit of your actions, and it will spread like wildfire. He told her because he knew that she needed someone to see her the most, but that would catapult her into a passion that would spread the word fast and far. And because of that, that whole city believed what they heard before they even saw any miracles. So we believe when the soul is ignited in the Christ consciousness, before we see any results, we know that we've been saved. We can feel it. We can feel it in the immediate fulfillment and peace and release of the shame and the cursedness. And we are immediately restored and redeemed. And so the Christ went straight to the broken whore of a woman who is represented again and again, and that whore of a woman, that broken woman, the used woman, the castaway, the one who is redeemed, unclean and untouchable, that represents all of us. And he goes straight to her because he knows that's the most important person to go to. Because by them healing, it heals so many more people, so much more depth of healing. The healing is most powerful. And that soul is every bit as precious, if not more, even more precious than an already perfect soul who comes and, has no resistance at all. Now, if you go into the mysticism of the divine holy marriage, we as the vessel, when we receive so readily without any process of earning the light, it creates bread of shame. It creates destruction and chaos. But when we restrict and we say, no, I can't possibly, I'm not worthy. You don't know me. I need to earn this. And it's like, that is the process. Being open and humble at the same time, and wanting to earn the light, but restricting and saying, no, I can't just take this and become like you without going through a process of actually knowing what it's like to become like you by living in the same way, of sacrificing my flesh and transcending that evil, dark, small, self-serving nature to become more like you for real and be a mirror image of you. Only then can I live an everlasting life. So the servant that the Fatima, the lower version that he goes to, she says, no, I can't be this, and he says, no, specifically, it is you. It is you that can be healed and go through the process willingly. After you first resist, because it's not just automatic what you're trained to do at this point. You are choosing by your own free will. Even though initially you might have resisted, you chose. And then that choice showed in you believed. So that's what made that redemption moment possible. That's what opened the way for the miracle. The Christ was revealed to the broken soul that resisted him at first, that wasn't just readily there. Meaning Jesus is coming for you, even if you think you're a lost cause. Even if you think, oh no, I've been too rebellious, I have been too broken, I've been too soiled. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. He's coming directly to you. Now, the other interesting layer of this is that in the Old Testament, Abraham, son of man, even though he had a covenant with God, he's still the son of man. The prophet sends a servant to find this person, to find the bride. Now, we learn in the Gnostic Gospels through the symbolism that the bride and the bridegroom, it's like the bride is, we're receiving the bridegroom. The bridegroom is the Christ, right? So there's always these metaphors of how we receive the Christ, because that is the holy union. When the soul is finally reunited in its original oneness with the full light of the Creator. But we are in the process of preparing the bride and the bridal chamber for that to happen. In the Old Covenant, there is an intermediary that comes to find the most prepared, pristine bride, right? The virgin. In the Old Covenant, there's an intermediary between the bridegroom and the bride, meaning the temple, the high priest, going to bring the sacrifice to the high priest to do it on your behalf, feeling the separation of having to go through the priesthood and through the church to worship and connect and praise. Whereas in the New Testament, Jesus came directly. He didn't send a servant on his behalf to go find a bride for him. He said, you know what? You're so valuable. I am coming myself. I want a direct connection with you. There is no intermediary necessary. We don't need a real estate agent to make this sale, baby. We don't need to pay that finder's fee, that commission. We can just do this one-on-one. So I'm coming to you, myself. I handpick you. You are my chosen one. In the Old Testament, the covenant was collective. The herd had to keep the laws in the way. They were collectively chosen as a people. And that's not bad, and that's not finished per se. But in the New Testament, God refines that and says, my son, I'm sending to you to seek you out individually. He chose you, your unique soul, and he's coming specifically for you. The used up, rode hard, hung up wet, whore of a soul, you old pirate whore, you old pirate hooker, he's coming for you. All right. In the heat of the day, when you've alienated yourself from all of the flock who followed the path rigidly, but, still outcast people, you were left on your own. And yes, you have been through hard things trying to correct for this in the hand that you're dealt when we correct for that karma in each life, that tikkun. And it's been in the broad heat of the day. Yes. Like the full light of the sun has been on you, and it's been hot, hotter than it has been for others. But I'm also coming to choose you specifically, because those struggles, that heat of the day is going to make you all the more receptive. It's going to make this drink of refreshing, eternal water all the more delicious and refreshing for you. So Jesus comes and chooses you one-on-one, and your relationship is between you and him one-on-one, and you do not need an intermediary, because you meet there at the temple, under the shade by the well. And the temple is wherever you meet the Christ, by the well, under the shade, under the sukkah, under the covering of the protection of God. Even exposed to the elements, yes, we are, but we are shaded, and we are given eternal waters. So just summing up in conclusion, because sometimes I get sidetracked, that the woman at the well ultimately did receive Christ, admitting her her sin and her past fully, and being so excited to receive that redemption and that forgiveness. And she was the first to declare him, to recognize him as the Christ, as the Messiah. And he went to her specifically because he knew that she would be the first to recognize him as the Christ. And so she was the first to go out and declare him as the Christ. So too, like our soul, like the Christ goes to save the soul that knows and recognizes the Christ and cries out to him. We all we have an assignment in this life to correct our soul. And we can't do that, not without the Christ's the path of the Christ, right? Without sacrificing our flesh and becoming like the Christ. That's the whole point. So it's like the soul searches for this, and the soul recognizes it first. The soul declares that first. And so Christ comes to save the souls that know, that are hungry and thirsty for the life-giving waters that his consciousness brings them. They are ready and excited when they see it and they recognize it, right? But she wasn't like automatically there, ready and prepared and ready to go at the beginning. She's at first like, wait, what? Huh? And like our initial reaction, the ego, the lower self, the shame pushes that way, the light at first. It doesn't feel like it can receive it, but we have to, when we recognize the realness and the gentleness and the true unconditional love that is being offered, it's like immediately we see that light and feel it and know it. And when we know it, we're set free forever. You will see the truth and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Okay, I can't conclude the recording because I just went into this to just read more about from the passage of when Jesus goes. Because now I've been talking about this just based on my recollection of the scene from The Chosen, and so now I went and pulled up the passage from John 4:4. Okay, and so now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria, So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so it was Jacob's well. And Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about noon. Now, noon is halfway through the day. Noon is the threshold between the positive hours of the day and the negative hours of the day, Kabbalistically speaking. So the light starts to fade in the second half of the day. So we're at the moment here of halfway point, right? Might even say halfway point through a life, or halfway through a period of time. A day might be like a time of consciousness for mankind. So it's like Jesus came in the at the high point, or at the climax of an age of where this level of consciousness was no longer sustainable, and we had to shift into the end of this consciousness to bring in a new day. So, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. So I think it's interesting to hear where his disciples had actually left the presence of the Christ to go buy food. They went outside of themselves. They went outside of the temple. They went outside of the Christ. They left the presence of Christ to go find nourishment, physical nourishment that will that doesn't last. Right? We go looking for the sustenance that only lasts a moment. It's instant gratification, right? And when we go away from the source of true fulfillment, we only ever seek instant gratification, and we always need more, and we always need more, and we always need more, right? This is not everlasting life, but this is temporary 3D life, 3D living. So when the Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Now, again, emphasizing the fact that the servant sent on behalf of Isaac was sent to get someone from the Jewish people, from that original covenant, right? From specifically Abraham's bloodline. It was a covenant between Abraham's bloodline and that they were seeking to maintain that ongoing inheritance. Okay, so in this scenario, though, Jesus is going to a woman who would be considered unclean, or the other, or his enemy, even. So, or an unclean vessel, an inappropriate vessel to receive the light of the Creator. So when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" As his disciples had gone into the town to buy food. And the Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" So she's saying, like, I am unclean in your regard. Like, how can you ask me for nourishment when the source of my nourishment would be inherently unclean to you, right? It would be inherently tainted. I am a tainted vessel. Jesus answers her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." Meaning, if you understood the God that I come from, not like specifically the God of Abraham, and you know that God, and you know who I am, sent on behalf of he, then you would ask him. You would be going to not the vessel, the husk that gives temporary water, right? You're going to physical problems and looking for physical solutions, right? You're going for idols that yield temporary results. But if you knew the true source, and you went to the true source rather than the vessel, but you went to the true source, the Creator, God, for fulfillment, then he would give you that spiritual blessing, that fulfillment, and give you everlasting life, give you everlasting blessing, elevating your soul beyond the temporary fulfillment of a one drink of water, one portion of water that will quench the physical flesh, but do nothing for the spiritual flesh. When you go through the motions, but it doesn't do anything to change the soul, it's valueless. You have to keep doing it over and over again. Again, referencing the old covenant of going to the temple and making these sacrifices to buy your cleanliness week after week, month after month. It doesn't do anything to change who you are. That is the old way of doing it. If you know the true living God and you go to the Christ will give you a different consciousness that will set you free from that. It will actually change your soul and actually set you free from the need to go after temporary cleanliness over and over again through ritual's sake, though it has no meaning and no value and no passion. It doesn't do anything to actually change your soul, to correct your soul. Correcting of the soul is sacrificing of the self. Making the self feel pain of the ego, of putting yourself last, putting yourself in a position of meekness and humility. Knowing that you need the spiritual nourishment, knowing that you are spiritually poor. And that's what needs changing. Not paying your spiritual, trust funds taxes. Basically, I have a spiritual trust fund. I'm chosen. Nothing has to change in me. I'm already bought and paid for. I just have to keep paying my taxes. That's the Old Testament way through the temple. But Jesus came to refine that and say, well, you know what? I'm coming for you and for your soul and to save your actual soul. And so I want a direct covenant with you where you connect to the true source and you are awakened and you're set free and you actually change your consciousness and change your heart and you become more like me. The actual physicalization of being in the mirror image of God. I can give you this as an example and you can become this too. So let's go back to the passage. So the woman says to him, you are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink. So if you knew who I was and you understood the little bit of service that I'm asking of you, you would do this readily. If you knew the gift and who it was that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? So she's saying, what do you mean? How do you have this how can you give me water when you don't have a vessel? How can you give me water when you're not an established high priest of the established temple? Who are you? Whose authority are you to give me this nourishment? How do you deliver this to me? Do you have a form for me to go and pray to this nourishment, this water? Can I go and gather this water from a specific place? You have no water to give to me, so how are you going to give me water? You don't have a method of which to deliver it to me. Not a physical method that I can see and feel and hear and taste and touch. You don't have that physical, process and ritual and performance to tell me to go through. You don't have Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Remember, the well is consciousness. It's understanding, it's wisdom, it's life, it's eternal life. It's the greater that your soul expands with the light of the Creator as you heal and purify your heart and soul through Christ consciousness. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? Now, circling back to when we originally said there's a significance of the fact that every prophet, when they claim a land on behalf of God, they dig a well there. The well is their connection to that insight, to the prophecy that makes them a prophet. This well is that flow of divine inspiration and provision and blessing and covenant that comes from their direct source, the direct connection to the Creator. The flowing of the waters, which is also associated with the sacral chakra or the Sfirat of Yesod, which represents the storehouse of Joseph. That was, the father of Jacob, who Joseph was the keeper of all the wealth of Israel, who was originally sold into slavery by his brothers. So all of these things are significant. So the patriarch, the prophet Jacob, wrestled with the angel Jacob. Jacob's ladder Jacob dug this well to bring nourishment to the people who would go and gather water there. He was a prophet who delivered consciousness to the people. And even though the prophets are great, they are not as great as the Messiah, as the Christ. The prophets can deliver you so much, but the Christ can deliver you true salvation. And so the Christ or the prophets are a physical living example of what they can offer. And then the temple itself, the structure of the system of the temple is even sort of like another more physicalized, lesser version of what the prophets are giving. But it's like more like the vessel that the prophets gave through, that the woman said, "Where's your vessel?" Right? How are you going to deliver me this water? So, sir, the woman said, "You have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep." The truth here, the living truth of the nature of God and the universe and reality, that's very deep. And you have nothing to draw with. You have nothing to deliver me through this water through. So how can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself? So Jacob was one of the patriarchs who gave the Jewish people the Jewish religion, their relationship with Adonai, with El Shaddai, right? So Jacob gave us this God and this religion and these ways to follow. Are you greater than even he that gave us all of this vessel through which to take this water from? So, sir, the woman said, "You have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" So Jacob abided by this. His sons abided by this. Everything that they nurtured and fed to other people were fed through and sustained by this wisdom and the ways of doing this and the ways of living and by keeping these laws. Remember, we haven't gotten to Moses yet, who had the 10 Commandments, who had like the officialized, all right, now we're all organized, like we have this on paper, organized in the Torah. This was before that. This preceded that. So like the divine, law was passed down through the generations of Abraham and given to the prophets directly. Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again." Meaning, yes, everyone who goes by this Old Testament covenant alone, it's not void and null, but it's just that this is only, it will only give you so much. It's not the full realization of the redemption, of the salvation. Yes, you're keeping covenant, but you're not being redeemed by this. You're not being saved by this. You're not being changed. So you need to go a step further to fully take on this yoke, this consciousness, to be changed from your heart. Your heart must be saved. Your soul must be saved. So Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water that I give them will never thirst." So Jesus brought people their own relationship to God and Holy Spirit, and the ability to begin to have their own connection, direct connection to God through prayer and through praise, wherever they were, alone in a private way, one-on-one, where God works on the soul of the individual to awaken their consciousness and to awaken their soul and to overcome their dark nature and to overcome their lower base egoic personality and instincts, and the need and the instinct for instant gratification and the need to receive for the self alone, and instead adopt the ability to practice self-control, restraint, restriction, temperance, and to receive for the sake of sharing, receive for the sake of the good of others as well. So Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this vessel will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water, welling up to eternal life," meaning this is an everlasting consciousness that will continue to reveal itself to you, that will continue to sustain you, that will continue to give you life while you're in the physical body, but also that will stay with you in the eternal life. Right? The physical sacrifices that you bring to the altar, no matter how perfect the heifer, is not going to make a difference for you in the afterlife. But the level of your soul was awakened. The amount of anger you were able to rid yourself of, the amount of hate that you were able to rid yourself of, the amount of sadness that you were able to rid yourself of, the amount of sin and iniquity and the wrong that you did to others, the amount of that you were that you were able to be forgiven of, that is going to make a difference in your soul when it leaves the body and it leaves this incarnation. Or you could say, as the woman, the Samaritan woman, who was called Fatima in the Chosen, who is just referred to as the Samaritan woman in this passage, she had 5 other husbands. And to me, that's almost like saying she had 5 other lives. She had 5 other attempts at trying to make this union work, of the soul and the soul's joining of the higher consciousness, and that then being reflected in our outer consciousness. The divine masculine, the divine feminine, united in the Holy Trinity with the pure light of God. So let's finish the passage. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming back here to draw water." So she's like, "Okay, I see that you're giving me actual salvation, but give me the salvation so I don't have to keep going through the motions of the old covenant, and I can have everlasting water, that I can see things the way that you see them and be released from the laws that put me, cast me out for my people and put me into shame." It's like this old way that's holding me bondage. Even good intentions can be used by the enemy to keep us bound. And he said, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Now the husband is the divine masculine, right? What is the divine masculine? It's the conscious, the outer consciousness, the way that we perceive the world in our conscious mind, the way that we behave and show up. So she has no consciousness that she owns. She's saying, like, I don't have the proper consciousness. And the Christ is saying, well, you've attempted this again and again, She said to her, "You are right when you say I have no husband. The fact is you have had," or Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet." Now, I think, too, the fact that she had 5 husbands signifies the upper, the Zarin pin. So the six Sphirot collected together in the upper realms have significance. And this is like mastering those levels of the soul, but the sixth Sphirot is the Tiferet, which is the Messiah, the redemption, the heart. She has attempted these other things, but she hasn't had salvation in her heart yet, which would be the sixth husband, the sixth Sphirot. And the husband, remember, the joining of the bride and the bridegroom in the bridal chamber is that union of that the soul and God in that bridal chamber. We united once more with God, with the Christ. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. Meaning, like, they had strange gods, like they didn't have a direct covenant. Like, God knew his prophets one-on-one. He spoke to them directly. The other people that weren't worshiping the God of Abraham, they weren't worshiping gods that they knew directly like that. They weren't specifically chosen. They didn't have a personal relationship with their gods. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. Salvation is from the Jews, yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. So the Jews were worshiping the Father in truth because they were doing the things that they were told. You know, they were keeping the laws, and they would go on to keep the laws. But in spirit, when Jesus has come back, they're like, I need you to be changed on a spiritual level. You need to worship me from the inside out. On the inside, when you change your heart and soul to look more like your perfect spirit, and in the ways that you live. One is not enough without the other. Right? Yet a time is coming and now has come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit. And his worshipers must worship the Spirit, worship in the Spirit and in truth. So the woman said, I know that Messiah, called the Christ, is coming. And when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And then Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. And then the disciples rejoined Jesus. Just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, what do you want? Or why are you talking with her? Then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? They came out of the town and made their way toward him. Meanwhile, the disciples urged him, Rabbi, eat something. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. Then his disciples said to each other, Could someone have brought him food? My food, said Jesus, is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Don't you have a saying, it's still 4 months until harvest? I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. Even now the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Thus the saying. So even now the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Meaning you're not just sowing seeds for someone who else is going to reap the benefits, but you're actually sowing seeds for the benefits of life that you will reap. Thus saying, one who sows and another reaps is true. Okay, so even now, one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Thus the saying, one sows and another reaps, is true. I sent you to reap what you have not worked for. So he says, you know what? It is true. This is going to get turned around for you. I'm going to do the work and you're going to get the reward. Others have done the hard work and you have reaped the benefits of their labor, meaning everything, all the things that the prophets went through have been laying the groundwork for you to receive me at this time. And you will receive the sacrifice that I make for you. I have been planting these seeds for you so that you can have this. You didn't do this. I did this. Just like Abraham did not take the spoils of war so that no one could take credit for Abraham's blessing but God. God gave Abraham everything. No one gave anything to Abraham. So too, I am giving this to you. It wasn't the spoils of war or anything else or anyone else that gave this to you, but I give it to you. And just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking to the woman, but no one asks, what do you want, or why are you talking with her? Okay, so then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people. So this is very significant too. The woman left the jar because that was her old vessel for receiving spiritual nourishment. She left her old beliefs behind. The God of the people that she was told, the ways that she was told, the church she was brought up in, the temple that she was brought up in. She left that old vessel, that old message behind. She left unencumbered to then go get the people and tell them. And she no longer needed the vessel for that water because it was temporary water to begin with. So now she had the water that she needed. And it was everlasting water that did not need to be rinsed and repeated. So my food, Jesus said, is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Don't you have a saying, it's still 4 months until harvest? I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. Right? They're all waiting for the big payoff to come. And it's like, it's here now. Like, take the fruit that I'm giving you. I'm literally here. This is what you've been waiting for your whole life. I'm in the presence of you. See me now. I see you. But open your eyes and look at the fields, they are ripe for harvest. Even now the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Right? Jesus is saying, I'm bringing you this directly to you. I'm not asking for you to bring me your anything. I'm not asking for anything from you, but for you to believe in me and for you to accept me wholeheartedly and to do the things that I'm telling you to do. So that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Thus the saying, one sows and another reaps, is true. I sent you to reap what you have not worked for. Others have done the work, have done the hard work, and you have reaped the benefits of their labor. Many Samaritans believe. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them. And he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. So he told me everything I ever did. Again, just like when Hagar, the servant of Sarah, said to God and named God, "You are the God who sees me." Because Sarah, the servant, had been impregnated by Abraham by doing what he wanted on his own terms, right? He did not wait on God's promise that he would have a child with Sarah. They jumped the gun and tried to have a child with their servant. And the servant obviously was raped and was like, even if she was like agreeing, it was still like not, it wasn't cool. She didn't want to do this. And so ran away. And God was like, if you go back, I have a plan for you. I will make sure that you bear many generations to come. But yeah, you've been through a hardship and you've now suffered, but you can go back to this household because there is a plan that will play out and you're a part of it, an integral part of it. And that's when she said, "You are the God who sees me." He also tells her, Ishmael, that he will be a donkey of a man. And that is representative of when we don't practice restriction and we take a reactive behavior, it creates chaos. It gives birth to chaos. There's more like Kabbalistic unpacking there, but in a nutshell, that would be the footnote. Okay, many of the Samaritans from that town believed, so he told me everything I did. Because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world." So they're like, we took your word for it, but now that we have heard him, we've witnessed for ourselves, like we absolutely, we're definitely on board. So that is the conclusion of the story of the Samaritan woman. And my connection through reading, like I've just recently started reading the Bible. I bought like a Hebrew translation. I'm trying to find like the most direct translation of the Hebrew Bible, but this is a start. But I started in Genesis, and I've also been obsessively watching The Chosen for almost a year now, over and over. And I just realized as I've been reading the book of Genesis, which in the first 10 pages of this Bible, it's a pretty big page Bible, but there's like, I'm already up to like Abraham and Isaac's story, but you've gotten all of these other stories already told from here. And it's just like this notable pattern that I noticed, that there's like this reoccurrence of pointing out in these very short stories with not a lot of detail, some of the details every detail that they choose to talk about is a symbolic representation of something that has layered meaning. And so I was like, okay, there's got to be significance of and reasons why they keep drawing attention to the fact that wells were dug in these specific places and altars were erected at the site of these wells, making them sacred ground, making them set apart, making them like an open air temple. And so Jesus coming to that Samaritan woman under the sukkah, the shade, and at the well, at the site of these altars, was saying that this is the temple wherever you meet me, and wherever you find nourishment in me, wherever you find the truth of me, that is your temple. I am present there, everywhere. You do not need a systematic, ordained, structured set of walls to tell you where you are, and if where you are is sacred, because where you are is sacred because you are sacred. And I will conclude this there. May peace be with you. There's another point that I need to make about the parallels of Jesus choosing the presumed soiled vessel of the Samaritan woman who would be considered unclean. She was not a virgin. She had 5 husbands in the past, and she had a current lover she was adultering with. So she was considered a whore, and an unclean woman who was cast away from her people. She was an outcast in society. This is who Jesus went to reveal his identity to, or be revealed through. This is the bridegroom going to meet the bride in the bridal chamber to reveal the Christ to the vessel, to the unclean, imperfect soul. That is we. We are her. We are the Samaritan woman who had been married 5 times. So, again, after the crucifixion, when Christ was even more exalted and had resurrected, who did he reveal himself to first? Who did he come to right away? Mary Magdalene, who, regardless of how historically, if she was actually a prostitute or not, whether she was a pristine vessel or not, or whether she was Christ's secret equal, secret wife, whatever that is, she collectively, archetypally now represents this fusion of these truths that have layered implication and every bit as much light and revelation. Then it's like a collective lure, because some people believe that she was a high priest, that she was never a prostitute at all, that she was prepared to be a high priestess. Others say that and people say that this was a slur. Others say that she was a prostitute. Some people think that her and Jesus were united in marriage. Others say that's not true. That's heresy. So either way, both can, if you look at the message behind either one, I think either one can reveal a level of truth. Now, symbolically, the Gnostic Gospels and throughout the Gospels in general, they compare the union of God with our consciousness, with our soul, as to a bride and her bridegroom coming together in the bridal chamber, in the seat of the soul, this union, this return to wholeness, right, that we've been yearning for ever since the separation from the fall of man and our fall from the Garden of Eden, from that place of paradise, from the garden. Remember, the place of paradise and union. So when Christ was resurrected, Mary came to the tomb. She was the one that came there. She was the one that knew to wait for him, to recognize him, to anticipate him. She was the bride, readying herself at the bridal chamber to meet the bridegroom at the portal of the threshold of life and death, right? When the Christ revealed himself to Mary, he revealed himself to her first, and he said, she didn't recognize him at first because she thought he was a gardener. She's in the garden, returning to the garden, the bride and the bridegroom. Now, interestingly enough, again, as fate would have it, we understand Mary, even if only through misinformation, that Mary represents a prostitute that was redeemed, right? She was considered a whore, a soiled woman cast away from her people, right? Untouchable, an untouchable feminine, the discarded feminine, right? Christ represents the Savior who goes straight to lifting up the feminine, to including the feminine within the church, to raising them up in the priesthood, in leadership, teaching them to read, giving them independent choice to set out and follow him if they choose, right? which required them to leave home and disobey their parents and to rebel against societal's expectations of them and to follow their own spirit and their own calling and their own purpose. So this is, again, the exaltation and the reclaiming of the discarded feminine. And and that is the first reception of the coming of the Christ. The second coming, the first coming, every time, it's the discarded feminine that meets the Christ first, that sees the Christ first, that recognizes the Christ first. You can also say that this the feminine also is represented by our soul, by our interior, by our heart, by our intrinsic realm. But in relation to the light being the masculine, God being the masculine, and we being the feminine, we receive God. We're all the feminine, right? So this represents all of us, these outcasts, these souls that are through their sin have been cast away from the garden of perfection, from the union of the divine. We are returning back to the bridal chamber to be united with that bridegroom. And he's not coming for and expecting us to be having been that pristine, perfect bride. But he comes back to the imperfect. Isn't that interesting? But that imperfect, they were the ones that were the first to want him, the first to accept and believe, the ones who were in the deepest need and the greatest thirst and the most prompt, with the most urgency. They needed and they accepted Jesus with all their heart and with all their devotion, and then became, Mary Magdalene became his disciple. Well, the woman became his evangelist, the Samaritan woman. So she was at that level of Jesus's physical union and in his incarnation with this woman at a material level. She goes out and evangelizes. Whereas Jesus at a transcendent level meets the Mary Magdalene, the soul that has become the disciple and the apostle of the apostles. He meets that woman at that level. This is another level that transcends, our earthly, physical, material relationship with divine, and actually goes into the spiritual relationship with the divine. Like what he said about, what was that last line? That we worship in truth and spirit. That the Samaritan woman then represents the level of truth, and then the appearance to Mary Magdalene represents the worship in spirit, or the union in spirit.